This Day in Sports History. This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. You can find more podcasts and more info at sportshistorynetwork.com. Thanks for checking into this edition. This is the 300th episode of This Dish, and I'd just like to say thanks for being part of the journey. A lot more to do to get to the finish line and start a second lap, but so far, it's been a fun ride. It's September 22nd, and on this day in 1927, time was cruel to Jack Dempsey. I am not a great reciter of quotes outside of the most cliché ones, but I did find this one that partly sums up what happened in this heavyweight championship fight in 1927. It's from Elizabeth Forsyth Haley, who wrote, "Time is a cruel thief to rob us of our former selves." In this case, though, time robbed Jack Dempsey of his future self, or what he could have been, and he believes he should have been. To the specifics, this was the heavyweight title fight between the champ Gene Tunney and the challenger Jack Dempsey. It was held at Chicago's Soldier Field, and 100,000 people jammed into the place to watch these two go toe-to-toe. The controversy happened early on in the 7th round. Dempsey threw a left hook that stunned the champ and sent him reeling into the ropes. Dempsey pounced and hit Tunney with a fierce barrage of punches to his wide-open chin. Tunney didn't exactly collapse to the ground, but more slowly slid down the ropes to the canvas. Dempsey was a bit surprised at what had just happened, and he was also a bit of an undisciplined fighter. Referee Dave Barry screamed at Dempsey to go to a neutral corner. Dempsey didn't listen. He stood over Tunney, delaying the start of the 10 count. Finally, Dempsey moved away and the count started. At 9, Tunney finally rose from the canvas, and there were a lot of people who thought the count had been long. Boxing writer and historian Bert Sugar was covering this fight, and after Tunney regained his feet, he got a tap on the shoulder with boxer Battling Nelson showing him a stopwatch with an elapsed time of 14 seconds, the supposed time that Tunney had spent on the mat. The fight should have been over, a new champ crowned. Dempsey had beaten Tunney, everybody said. But here's the thing, and Sugar hammered this point home. The count didn't start because Dempsey didn't do what he was supposed to do. The count didn't start until he moved to a neutral corner. Tunney beat the 10 count by a second, even if he was on the mat for 5 more seconds before the count actually started. Tunney recovered, made it to the end of the round, and then in the 8th, hit Dempsey with a roundhouse right that put the challenger on the mat. He was able to get back to his feet, but he was not the same after that punch. Tunney continued to punish him for the next 2 rounds, and then was declared the winner by unanimous decision to retain his heavyweight title. The fight became known as the long count fight, and it was the second time that Dempsey lost to Tunney, and it was the final fight of his career. On this day in 1990, it was a record-setting day for Illinois running back Howard Griffith. The Illini were hosting Southern Illinois, and the Salukis had upset on their mind in the first quarter. The Saluki defense stripped the football out of Griffith's hands, and then they turned that into an early touchdown. But that fired up and focused Griffith, who proceeded to roll up 208 yards rushing and score 8 rushing touchdowns. Here's the thing, though. This game was tight at the end of the first half. Illinois was the number 15 team in the country at this point, and they should have been rolling over Southern Illinois, but it was just 28-21 at the break. Illini coach John Makovich said Griffith wouldn't have played in the second half if the game had not been close, but it was, and so Griffith went back to work, scoring the other 4 of his 8 in the third quarter to sprint away from the Salukis. He scored his final one with 1:25 left in the third quarter to give Illinois the 56-21 win. His 8 touchdown runs broke the 39-year-old Division I record set by Ole Miss running back Arnold Showboat Boykin, and the 48 points he scored topped Jim Brown's 43 that he scored at Syracuse in 1956. Griffith would stand alone in the record book until 2016, when Arizona State's Kalen Ballage equaled it, and then Buffalo's Jarrett Patterson joined the shortlist in 2020. And on this day in 1991, Rollen Stewart was arrested in Los Angeles. I'll give you a moment to run through your mental Rolodex to come up with who that is, and then tell you that you probably will not. 1, because Rollen did not play a sport. 2, because you probably remember him for another reason. Rollen Stewart was the John 3:16 guy with a rainbow wig that seemed to show up in just the right place at sporting events, especially golf tournaments all over the country, wearing his John 3:16 shirt and others, and his rainbow wig. By today's vernacular, you'd probably say he was an early version of an influencer. By most people's definitions, Rollen Stewart would be an eccentric. How else do you describe a man who obsessively traveled about 60,000 miles a year, living out of his car and attending sporting events to position himself in just the right spot to be in the background at a sporting event to display his t-shirt or his sign? He went to baseball games, positioned himself behind home plate, sat behind the end zone at football games, but was most prominent in the galleries of PGA golf tournaments, wiggling his rainbow mop and white t-shirt emblazoned with the Bible verse he hoped you either knew or would go look up yourself. And if that had been it, then he would have just been a guy with a passion or obsession, or however you would like to describe it. But it didn't stop there. His behavior became more erratic. In 1986, his fourth wife filed for divorce after she accused Stewart of choking her during a World Series game because, she wasn't standing in the correct place to hold a sign. He denied the assault. During the 1990 Masters, he set off a remote-controlled air horn and stink bombs that disrupted play. No charges were filed for that incident, but later in the year, police disrupted his plans again after they found out that he was planning on setting off more smoke bombs at several different events in Connecticut, New Jersey, and Los Angeles. They suspected that he was also carrying a gun, and so Rollen Stewart was considered armed and dangerous. On this day in 1991, Stewart barricaded himself in an LAX airport hotel room. He had a .45 caliber pistol and smoke bombs. He had locked a hotel maid in the bathroom and pounded nails into the entryway door. He lobbed smoke bombs at law enforcement, and it led to an 8-hour standoff. He demanded a news crew to be sent so he could address the world about his belief of the end times coming and about the coming apocalypse. Worried that a more and more deranged Stewart may start taking pot shots at planes landing at LAX, a SWAT team rammed through the door, tackled Stewart, and arrested him. Prior to his trial, Stewart was offered a plea deal that would have given him a 12-year prison sentence with eligibility for parole in 6. Instead, he went to trial and was given 3 life sentences, served consecutively for his hostage standoff and making terrorist threats. His appeals since then have been denied. In 2008, he was interviewed by the LA Times, and for a man who attended some of the greatest sporting events in many of the great venues across the country, he was quoted as saying, "I despised sports." Time now for today's Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. Oceans cover 71% of the Earth's surface, and yet less than 10% of the ocean floor has been mapped. That's all I've got for you today. This and every episode of This Day in Sports History is researched, written, voiced, and produced by me, Steve White. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for episode number 301 of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.